The original 1980s Transformers animated series is one of the most significant pieces of media in the entire franchise, with a legacy and influence that's still shaping the brand today. But if history had gone another way, things could have been very different. In early 1984, when work on the cartoon was just beginning, writer Jeffrey Scott was commissioned to help develop the series for television. And the result was a story and a cast of characters that were wildly different to the series as we'd come to know it. Finally uncovered in full for the first time in over 40 years, this is the story of an alternate vision for the Transformers like you've never seen before. At the beginning of 1984, Hasbro were gearing up to launch the original Transformers toy line. The previous year, they had partnered with Marvel Comics to develop the line's story and characters. Company editor-in-chief Jim Shooter had created a story treatment that imagined the toys as alien robots from the planet Cybertron. Writer Bob Budiansky had created names and character profiles for each of the individual figures. And plans were in place to use this work as the basis for a 4-issue comic book miniseries and a 3-episode animated miniseries to be co-produced by Marvel's media arm, Marvel Productions, and Sunbow Productions, the animation company owned by Hasbro advertising contractor Griffin Bacall. Now, most series Marvel Productions had worked on up to that point were created in partnership with national TV networks, who bought the programs, had a say in their content, and aired them across America. But the Transformers miniseries was being produced for first-run syndication, meaning that Hasbro, Marvel, and Sunbow were taking on the greater risk of producing it themselves and selling the broadcast rights to multiple individual local TV stations around the country one by one, via Hasbro subsidiary Cluster Television. Work on the miniseries had begun by early February, with writer George Arthur Bloom delivering the script for the first episode on the 8th of the month. The week after Bloom's first script came in, Hasbro debuted the Transformers toy line to retailers at the New York Toy Fair. It sold like gangbusters, and the company immediately went to work planning to extend and expand the toy line and its associated media into 1985. A single 3-episode miniseries wasn't going to be enough. Now they were ready to invest in a full season. Immediately, even before Toy Fair was over, Marvel Productions commissioned writer Jeffrey Scott to help put together a proposal for a weekly, 13-episode Transformers series. But as a bigger investment, and thus a bigger risk, instead of syndication, the series was going to be pitched to major TV network CBS. On February 22nd, Scott met with Marvel Productions Vice President of Network Series Development, Hank Saroyan, and the two men hashed out the basic story details for the proposal, after which Scott went to work writing it up into a full production bible. What they created was unconnected to the 3-part miniseries already in production, starting the story of the Transformers over again from the beginning. And moreover, they ignored virtually all of the development work done by Shooter and Budiansky at Marvel Comics, instead crafting an original concept that gave the Transformers totally different origins and characterizations. Now, this big change might have been an innocent one, the result of Scott and Saroyan lacking access to the existing material, and with no time to wait for it to come in, just having to plough ahead and come up with their own story. But it is also probably important to explain that, at this point in time, Marvel Productions and Marvel Comics didn't get along. According to Jim Shooter, Marvel Productions head David DePatie thought that the creators at Marvel Comics were amateurish morons, whose work was garbage. Shooter once told the story on his blog of how, when the two companies were contracted by Knickerbocker Toys to develop a toy line for them named Mysterians, Marvel Productions had ignored all the work Marvel Comics had done on the property and tried to pitch their own original take for a cartoon instead. Whether it was for this reason, or just unfortunate coincidence, pretty much the exact same thing happened with Transformers. In the story Scott and Saroyan created, the Autobots and Decepticons were non-transforming robots from an unnamed planet on the far side of the galaxy, where life had evolved along mechanical lines due to the extreme gravity of the world's sun. The two factions had been at war for 1,000 generations, until, under the leadership of Optimus Prime, the Autobots finally succeeded in not merely defeating, but destroying the Decepticons. But the destruction of the Decepticons' robot bodies wasn't the end. Their electronic consciousnesses survived, escaping the remains of their bodies in the form of glowing orbs of energy, which fled into space to seek new worlds and new mechanical forms to inhabit. The disembodied Decepticons arrived on Earth in the 1930s, taking refuge beneath the ocean in the Bermuda Triangle. From there, they began the process of seeking out Earth machines to serve as their new bodies. A Decepticon's energy orb would enter a machine and transmute it into a robot form for their consciousness to inhabit. The Decepticons spent decades slowly, methodically co-opting machines in secret, leading to stories among humans about the strange disappearances of aircraft, the mysterious sinking of ships, and eerie glowing lights in the sky. Meanwhile, the Autobots, knowing that the Decepticons would wreak havoc on an unsuspecting galaxy if they were to reacquire physical forms, had also left their homeworld to search for their enemies. Drawn to Earth by reports of the supposed paranormal phenomena occurring there, the Autobots also implanted their consciousnesses into Earth machines to hide among the planet's people and root out the Decepticons. The series was imagined as being like a kid's version of classic sci-fi movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or the 1967 TV series The Invaders, built around the idea of aliens coming to Earth and hiding amongst its people by surreptitiously impersonating and replacing its inhabitants, or in this case, its machines. The individual Autobots and Decepticons featured in Scott's Bible were also very different from how we would come to know them. At the time he was writing the Bible, Scott hadn't yet been provided with Bob Budiansky's character profiles, requiring him to invent his own personalities, functions, and powers for the robots, with some even having their gender changed to meet CBS's requirement that the show include female characters. From the large number of Autobot toys available, 6 were chosen to serve as the show's main cast. They were Optimus Prime, the heroic, noble, warm-hearted leader. His trailer served as the Autobots' headquarters, large enough to contain the whole team, always mobile so the Decepticons could never discover its location. Jazz, Prime's reckless, impulsive second-in-command, who had a rivalry with the Decepticon Starscream. Sideswipe, the Autobots' intelligence gatherer, able to tap into any communications channel. Sideswipe was one of the characters reinvented as female. She was in love with Optimus Prime, and Prime shared her feelings, but feared growing too close to her, as he had already lost too many friends and loved ones in battle over the years. Mirage, a cool, calm emergency response specialist. A flashy wisecracker, he would constantly hit on Sideswipe, but Optimus was the only bot for her. Trailbreaker, the team scout, who loved the terrain of Earth, but missed his homeworld dearly. And lastly, the character of Bumblebee was totally reworked into Toad, the Autobots' messenger and spy. Even his colour was changed from the toy's yellow to green, hence his new name. Toad would be the comic relief of the series. He had taken as his new body a beaten-up old Volkswagen Beetle, and he couldn't get the form to work right, constantly mistransforming and running into things, as well as running out of gas and getting speeding tickets. Additionally, Ironhide, Hound, Ratchet, and Prowl were positioned as supporting characters, staying in the background until a plot called for their unique talents. The Decepticon forces were made up of Megatron, the cruel leader. His energy orb had taken possession of an experimental Soviet particle beam cannon, and he could transform into either a full-size version of this weapon or shrink to become a handheld pistol version. Soundwave, who believed he should be Decepticon leader and was constantly at odds with Megatron. He was accompanied by his Condor cassette spy, Buzzsaw. The other cassettes weren't mentioned, the only Decepticon toy characters left out of the Bible. Starscream, the other character Scott reimagined as female. She was a vicious fighter with a hair-trigger temper, armed with a laser heat ray on one wing and an Absolute Zero freeze ray on the other, and was determined to get revenge on Jazz for destroying her body back on their homeworld. Thundercracker, a strong, silent Decepticon equipped with twin tractor beams. And lastly, Skywarp, a wicked Decepticon fueled by hate, who could create space-time portals with his Warp Ray. As with Toad, the colours of all three Decepticon jets were changed from their toys. Instead of grey, Starscream was white. Instead of blue, Thundercracker was red. And at this point in time, Hasbro planned for Skywarp to be olive drab, which Scott changed to black. As it happened, Hasbro changed their minds and made the finished Skywarp toy black as well. But that feels more likely to have been a coincidence, rather than Scott's Bible actually influencing the direction of the toy line. Now this was only the core Decepticon group. Megatron was holding innumerable Decepticon energy orbs in reserve, seeking new machines to implant them in to expand his army. As laid out in the Bible, each episode of the series would involve the villains targeting new machines to convert into new Decepticon bodies, creating original characters not represented in the toy line, who at the end of each adventure would be destroyed by the Autobots, leaving only the core group of toy-based Decepticons remaining. And of course, the series would also feature a supporting cast of humans. One idea Scott floated was to have the Autobots take over the vehicles of a club of car enthusiasts, creating an instant group of human friends for the robots. But in the end, he settled on just two. A trucker named William Conroy and a teenage girl named Wendy Fairchild. Conroy, nicknamed Duke, was the owner of the truck that Optimus Prime had taken as his new body. He was characterized as a banterous Han Solo type, a guy focused on making a living rather than saving the universe. And as such, he was always complaining about having the source of his income co-opted by aliens. From his position inside Prime's cab, Duke acted like a backseat driver in battle, constantly warning Prime not to get damaged so that he still had a working truck he could earn a paycheck with. But like Han Solo, Duke had a heart of gold and always came good in the end. He was a talented mechanic, and he knew all the best roads and all the best places to hide, with a common man, common sense understanding of life on Earth that was invaluable to the Autobots. Wendy was the owner of the Volkswagen Beetle that Toad had taken for a body. One early idea Scott had for her was that she was the daughter of a government official, and that Toad had initially taken over her car as part of a spying mission before befriending her. But this idea was dropped, and in the final Bible, she was just an ordinary 16-year-old girl from a Midwestern town. Wendy was warm, smart, and full of knowledge about the people, places, and things of Earth that she could share with the Autobots. But she also wanted to live a normal life, and owning a car that would often get called away on a mission right in the middle of a date and come back punched full of laser holes didn't make it easy. The Decepticons also had a human ally of their own, a greedy, selfish criminal named Arthur Kroll, who agreed to help the villains in their conquest of Earth in return for being allowed to rule over humankind once they were finished with the planet. Naturally, though, Megatron and Kroll didn't trust each other very much. Ultimately, Kroll was only out for himself. Kroll served as a spy for the Decepticons among humankind, gathering intelligence and performing acts of espionage. One of his particular duties was to carry Megatron while he was in his pistol mode, allowing the Decepticon leader to covertly gain access to human installations he could never enter in his robot form. As tended to be the standard for cartoons at the time, it wasn't planned for the series to have an introductory episode telling the story of how the Transformers came to Earth. Instead, that would be established in the show's opening title sequence, and the cartoon itself would get straight to business, telling stories of the Decepticons seeking new machines to bring to life, and the Autobots' efforts to stop them. Potential episode plots Scott proposed in the Bible included Rotten to the Core. Megatron learns of the New York City subway system's hundreds of train cars, and decides to take control of the Big Apple from the inside out. Arthur Kroll helps the Decepticons sneak into a subway tunnel, where they proceed to implant energy orbs into the subway cars, transforming them into Decepticon robots. The Autobots track the Decepticons down, battling them beneath the city as they attempt to save the humans who are trapped in the cars. In a subplot, a group of Guardian Angel-like teens are caught in one of the subway cars and assist Duke and Prime in turning the tide on the Decepticons. The Titanium Germ. While Megatron is attempting to transform the oil platforms off the coast of Alaska into Decepticons, Jazz comes into contact with a titanium alloy that's foreign to the Autobots. It acts like a deadly germ, invading his mechanical innards and developing into a biomechanical disease. The Autobots must not only stop the Decepticons, but find an antidote before Jazz loses his robot form. Anything for a friend. Megatron and the Decepticons attempt to track down a nuclear submarine so they can transform it into another robot warrior, giving them the ability to continue their mission beneath the seas as well. When Prime tries to leave his truck form and take over an old mothballed battleship to help stop the Decepticon submarine warrior, he is almost destroyed. Duke, in an effort to save Prime, risks his life by forming a mind link with the Autobot leader, putting the strength of both their wills together in order to defeat Megatron. Not on the first date. Wendy is about to go on her first date with a nice boy from high school when trouble arrives. It seems Megatron has already broken into the largest electronics factory in Japan and is about to transform thousands of electronic gadgets, from computers to typewriters, into Decepticons. Wendy's date gets stood up, but there's no time to lose, so when Toad transforms into robot mode, she's dragged along on the deadly mission. Time for trouble. Arthur Kroll proves what kind of a louse he really is when, through his espionage work, he reveals to Megatron the location of a top-secret test site of a government time machine. With his help, Megatron and the other Decepticons take over the test site and transform the time machine into an incredible Decepticon warrior robot. The Autobots must stop the Decepticons before they travel into another time where they can further their evil goals, free of Autobot intervention. At least one piece of concept art appears to have been drawn up to accompany this first Bible. It features Optimus opening fire on a trio of identical Condor cassette Decepticons, with Duke sitting behind the windshield in his chest, while Wendy, in the green vehicle mode Toad, looks on. Scott completed the Bible in just 3 days, delivering it on February 25th, and Saroyan then took it to Hasbro and CBS. Following individual meetings with the two companies' representatives, Hasbro President Stephen Hassenfeld and advertising contractors Tom Griffin and Joe Bacall, and CBS's Ted Field, Judy Price, and Michael Cassett, a list of changes were settled upon that required the Bible to be heavily revised. Scott quickly went to work on a second draft, which he turned in on March 7th. Hasbro had rejected outright the concept of the Transformers being energy orbs that possessed Earth machines, and directed that the story return to the premise Shooter had devised, that the Autobots and Decepticons were transforming robots from Cybertron who crash-landed on Earth 4 million years ago, leaving them entombed in a volcano until an eruption awoke them in the present day. This brought things back into line with the 3-part miniseries, and from there, CBS came up with a new direction for the show. The weekly series would now be set 5 years after the miniseries, by which time the Decepticons, vastly outnumbering the Autobots, had conquered virtually the entire Earth. Having taken control of the governments and economies of all the planet's industrialized nations, the Decepticons had repurposed all major factories and manufacturing centers to construct vast armies of new Decepticon robots, assembled by a huge planet-wide labor force of enslaved humans. But even under Decepticon rule, life on Earth went on. To ensure that the humans' basic survival needs were met, the Decepticons had allowed human society to continue. Economies still functioned, and humans still lived their day-to-day lives, working their jobs, going to school, just all under the oppressive shroud of the Decepticons' ever-watching eyes. Rather than body snatchers or invaders, the reference points were now Orwell's 1984 and Wells's War of the Worlds. It was a world conquered by giant mechanical invaders who controlled all governments, press and TV broadcasts, leaving the populace too afraid to even say a word against them, never knowing if even their own car might be a Decepticon in disguise, listening in on them. And of course, Star Wars was a big influence too, with the Autobots now cast as a scrappy band of rebels fighting against the fascist empire that controlled the world. The main cast of the show was mostly the same as in the first Bible, but the characterizations created for it were discarded and their profiles amended to match Budiansky's bios. Also, Hasbro declared that they didn't want any of their toys to be depicted as female, and that if the show had to have female characters, then original ones would have to be created for the cartoon to fulfill that need. The Autobot side was cut down to just the 6 main bots, removing the 4 planned supporting heroes. Optimus Prime, Jazz, Trailbreaker and Mirage all remained, but the female Sideswipe was dropped and replaced with the required original character, Firecycle. Firecycle was the team's skilled, level-headed medic, a master of electronic surgery who could turn even a toaster into a fighting machine, but who was so reluctant to inflict pain on other beings that she didn't even like stepping on grass. She transformed into a turbocharged motorcycle, so fast that she could even drive straight up walls. Firecycle had the same romantic connection to Optimus Prime that Scott had originally invented for Sideswipe, and she was armed with the twin heat and freeze rays that Scott had conceived for Starscream. Another change on the Autobot side was that Hasbro vetoed the name Toad for the Volkswagen Beetle. Now, the documents don't go into any detail as to why, but it'd be my guess that this is probably because Scott had changed the name of a toy character, and what Hasbro meant was that they wanted it changed back to Bumblebee. But if that was what they wanted, then they either didn't communicate it properly, or Scott didn't understand, because for the second draft, Scott renamed the Volkswagen Autobot Muffler. In this version of the story, Muffler had adopted the form of a VW Beetle to hide in a used car lot while on the run from the Decepticons, and it was here that he was found and purchased by Wendy Fairchild. Muffler didn't have the heart to run out on her and cause her to lose the money she'd spent, so he resigned himself to serving as her car when he wasn't needed by the Autobots. Wendy nicknamed him Muffy, a name Muffler thought was better suited to a dog. Hasbro had also requested that he not be a broken-down, problem-ridden car, which again I think was probably so that the Volkswagen toy wouldn't seem unappealing to kids. So instead, Muffler's personality was tweaked to make him a lovable dork, whose constant bumbling and mishaps were the product of his own klutziness. Multiple pieces of art of Muffler were created to accompany the second Bible, depicting the character getting up to a variety of goofy antics that really painted a picture of a silly, light-hearted show, in pretty sharp contrast to the very sinister premise that the story was now built around. The illustrations feature an original design for Muffler, which looks nothing like the Bumblebee toy. But even if this version of the show had been made, it's very unlikely he'd have actually looked like this. He was meant to be Bumblebee, after all, and Marvel had already created character models for Bee and the other Transformers for use in commercials and in the 3-part miniseries that this show would have used as well. Interestingly though, these drawings of Muffler do resemble a different toy. The transforming Volkswagen Beetle released the previous year in the Japanese toy line Machine Robo, which in 1984 would become part of Transformers' rival series, GoBots, as the evil Bug Bite. The art isn't a perfect match for the toy, but some of the small, precise details, particularly the claw hands and the distinctive 3 notches cut into the forearms, match so closely you do have to wonder if the unknown Marvel Productions artist behind these pieces really was working off of reference material of the wrong transforming yellow Volkswagen toy. Speaking of Muffler's colour, in the art and in one line of the Bible, he's yellow, which you'd expect given that he's based on Bumblebee. But at other points in the Bible, and in the pilot script that Scott would go on to write, more on that in a minute, he was said to be pink, playing up his role as a girl's car. Another inconsistency with the toy line it seems likely Hasbro would have ironed out if this project had gotten any further. Over on the Decepticon side, Starscream's gender was switched back to male, but unlike Sideswipe, he remained part of the show's cast. Instead, the Decepticons were joined by a new female member named Whirlpool, a vicious villain possessed of a seductive charm that enabled her to trick even Autobots into thinking she was their friend before she turned on them. In fact, Whirlpool had once been an Autobot, but had defected to the Decepticon side. Optimus Prime wanted to try to reform her, but she was fixated on destroying the Autobot leader, mainly as a way to prove to herself that her decision to join the Decepticons had been the right one. Whirlpool transformed into an amphibious assault vehicle, which could further convert by extending rotors to become a helicopter, or diving fins to become a submarine, making her a quadruple threat on land, in the air, and both above and below the ocean. She was armed with implosion torpedoes that sucked in and compressed the mass of anything caught in their blast radius, and she could generate whirlpools with her rotors. But the biggest change on the Decepticon side was Megatron himself. Reading between the lines of Scott's notes, it's evident that one limitation CBS placed on the show was that Megatron couldn't be a handgun. One proposal for a replacement alternate mode was a laser tank, but for the finished Bible, he was reinvented as a satellite particle beam cannon. But, presumably because this didn't match the Megatron toy, and as I think we've established at this point, Hasbro really didn't want the characters in the cartoon diverging from how the toys depicted them, the character in the cartoon was given a new name. Now, the leader of the Decepticons was known as Negator. Instead of hiding on the bottom of the ocean as in the first Bible, Negator's headquarters was in the Rocky Mountains above Boulder, Colorado, a huge fortress carved into the mountains themselves. On the human side of things, Duke, Wendy and Crawl all remained part of the show, with just a few changes and additions. First, Hasbro had vetoed the name Duke for the Autobots' trucker friend. Again, the notes don't say why, but the reason's pretty obvious. Duke was also the name of the lead hero over on fellow Hasbro series G.I. Joe, and using it here would have been a recipe for confusion. The character was renamed Matt Conroy, and in this version of the story, he met Optimus Prime when he found a damaged truck on the side of a desert highway and fixed it up, only to discover he'd repaired the leader of the Autobots. It was also decided to give Matt a pet dog, a pretty standard cartoon trope of the era which Marvel Productions had made great use of in the past. The pooch in question was a German shepherd named Bert, whose talented nose could sniff out a Decepticon even when they were disguised in alternate mode. There was some discussion about reworking Wendy to be Russian, inspired by world-famous Romanian gymnast Nadia Comaneci, who had toured the US a few years earlier in 1981. But in the end, she remained as she had been in the first draft, an ordinary girl from the Midwest, now likened specifically to Dana Freeling, the character played by actress Dominique Dunne in the 1982 horror film Poltergeist. Taking the Poltergeist inspiration further, the CBS meeting led to the creation of a little brother for Wendy, just as Freeling had in the film, a mischievous 11-year-old named Eddie, who was a big fan of Muffler and always finding ways to tag along on Autobot missions, totally blind to the danger he was putting himself in. In the new scenario of the second Bible, Wendy and Eddie's parents were now part of the Decepticons' labour force. As well as the humans, Hasbro wanted the Autobots to also be aided by their computer, Teletran-1, as seen in the miniseries. But CBS felt that the Autobots having a computer was unnecessary and held the potential for confusion, since they were all robots with computer brains already, so Teletran didn't make the cut. As with the first Bible, the intention was to cover the backstory of the Decepticon conquest of Earth in the show's opening sequence, allowing the cartoon itself to get straight to business telling stories in the new status quo. This time, Scott conceived a full season's worth of 13 potential episode premises. In addition to slightly reworking the plots of Rotten to the Core, The Titanium Germ, Not on the First Date, and Time for Trouble to fit into the new scenario, his 9 new ideas were: the erasing of Optimus Prime. When Prime is captured by Negator, the evil Decepticon leader proceeds to strip his memory tapes, acquiring Autobot secrets that will lead to the inevitable defeat of the entire Autobot force. Matt Conroy must risk his life to free his robot friend and steal back the Optimus memory tapes. The Plutonium Plot. Negator realizes that if he can prevent the Autobots from acquiring new fuel sources, he has only to wait until the Autobots run down, then sweep them up with his Decepticon soldiers. But the Autobots get wind of the plot, and the game is on. Optimus Prime and his men must find a way to sneak into one of the nuclear power reactors and restock their supplies before their batteries and time run out. A cold day in December. With a helpless Earth scientist under his thumb, Negator discovers that with a diamond-steel alloy, he can increase the destructive power of his Decepticon warriors by 10-fold. But where to get enough diamonds? Simple. The coal fields of Pennsylvania. Negator will use his human labour to mine 100 million tons and thermopressurize them into diamonds. While Negator is thinking of universal domination, the people of the eastern US are simply thinking of keeping warm. It seems they're facing the coldest winter in decades, and without the coal for heating, many may not survive. Optimus Prime and his Autobot comrades must regain control of the coal mines so that millions can have heat. Nobody home. When Wendy comes home to find her parents missing, she soon discovers that they were taken by Decepticon police to a distant factory where they're needed to build a new and far more dangerous breed of mind-controlling Decepticon robots. Wendy and Eddie embark on a dangerous journey of their own, enlisting the help of the Autobots to get their parents back. Operation Alpha Centauri. Negator completes his first intergalactic warship fleet and plans to begin his takeover of the rest of the universe. The Autobots must stop his advance in order to set back his timetable for conquest. To do so, they enlist the help of a human underground of scientists who help the Autobots build a ship of their own. What follows is a Star Warsian battle that leaves Negator's battle plans in shambles. The Robot with 1,000 Eyes. As in the days of the Old West, the Autobots catch wind of a shipment of Decepticon optical sensors and make plans to hijack it, delaying the completion of another 100 robots. Unfortunately, the Autobots discover their plans have been overheard by a Decepticon spy, disguised as an abandoned car. Now the Autobots must act quickly, preventing the Decepticon from warning Negator so that they can see their way to victory. A robot's best friend is his dog. Matt's German Shepherd Bert thwarts a Decepticon scheme with his sensitive nose, and the Autobots have cause for celebration. But Negator is tired of this four-legged flesh creature causing him trouble, so he sends a battalion of Decepticons to get him. And get him they do. Now the Autobots want to return the favour, assisting Matt in a raid on Decepticon headquarters to free their best friend. A new Muffler. Muffler is captured during a fierce battle between the Autobots and Decepticons. Optimus and the others go to his rescue, but getting him back seems to be almost too easy. They write it off on their own good fortune, but when their further battle plans keep failing, they begin to suspect something is amiss. One of them may be a traitor. They begin to suspect one another, and even start to suspect Matt and Wendy. But Muffler's lack of problems is what gives him away. The once klutz hasn't made a blunder since he was captured by the Decepticons. Now that they've got the imposter, they have to get back the real Muffler. And lastly, a deadly decision. After a severe battle with the Decepticons leaves several of the Autobots wounded, Firecycle must surgically put them back together. But there isn't enough power or supplies. One of the wounded will die. Optimus, being the leader, insists it'll be him. None are happy with this decision. Firecycle because of her deep feeling for Optimus, Matt because of his friendship, etc. The question: how to get the needed supplies in time to save Optimus without endangering the others. From this list of ideas, a robot's best friend is his dog was selected to be expanded into a full pilot episode, and Scott spent the remainder of the month writing the script, turning it into a soft introduction to the world and its characters. The story opens on Wendy and Eddie as they prepare to head to school in Muffler. On the way, they run into a Decepticon checkpoint, where Muffler's klutziness accidentally exposes his identity as an Autobot. Muffler flees with the humans aboard and is pursued by the Decepticons through the city and into the mountains, where he's saved when Optimus Prime and Matt come to their friend's rescue. Concurrently, Jazz and Trailbreaker liberate a steel mill where new Decepticons are being manufactured from the villain's control. But it turns out this victory isn't what it appears. The two Autobots have been allowed to win, so that when they summon their comrades to join them, an army of Decepticons hiding around the mill in their alternate modes can blindside and destroy them. Fortunately, when the other Autobots arrive on the scene, Bert's sensitive nose sniffs out the hiding Decepticons and foils the ambush. Though saved from destruction, the Autobots are still outnumbered. In the battle that follows, Jazz is badly wounded and the Autobots are forced to retreat, allowing the Decepticons to retake the mill. News of the ambush's failure soon reaches Negator at Decepticon headquarters, and he instructs Soundwave to bring Bert to him so that they can study his nose mechanism. With the Autobots occupied tending to the wounded Jazz, Matt lets Wendy and Eddie take Bert with them for protection as they head on to school. Unfortunately, this leaves the dog wide open. Soundwave, who in this script is described as being red rather than the toy's blue, tracks Bert to the school and captures him for Negator. Once Jazz is healed thanks to an energy transfusion from Optimus administered by Firecycle, Trailbreaker concocts a Trojan horse scheme to rescue Bert. First, the Autobots launch a fresh attack on the steel mill and once more take it back from the Decepticons, then use the mill to fabricate hollow Decepticon body shells. Then they hide themselves inside the shells and have themselves sent straight to Decepticon headquarters, disguised as part of a regularly scheduled shipment of new robots. Once inside, the Autobots burst out of their disguises and battle begins, during which Matt saves Bert from dissection on a Decepticon operating table. Their mission a success, the Autobots beat a quick retreat. Negator attempts to fire on them as they flee, but a well-aimed shot from Prime throws off Negator's blast and causes it to strike the cavernous mouth of Decepticon headquarters and trigger a cave-in, buying the bots the time they need to escape. Scott's pilot script was delivered on March 29th, and that's as far as things went. Exactly what happened to change things, we don't know. Maybe CBS decided to pass on the proposal, or maybe Hasbro or Marvel changed their minds about producing the series for network TV. What we do know is that sometime within the next few weeks, it was decided that, like the miniseries before it, the Transformers cartoon would also be made for syndication instead of for a network. As previously noted, this was a greater risk, but it would allow Hasbro and Marvel full control over the content of the program, freeing them from the restrictions a network like CBS would place on it. Of note, somewhere around the time this big change happened in the month of April, David DePatie left Marvel Productions, and a new president was appointed in his place, Margaret Loesch, a former executive producer at Hanna-Barbera, who would go on to heal the fraught relations between Marvel Productions and Marvel Comics. Now again, we don't know if Loesch had any hand in the switch of Transformers from a network show to a syndicated one, but what we do know is that when she joined Marvel Productions, she brought with her Hanna-Barbera staff writers Bryce Malek and Dick Robbins. These men were immediately given the job of putting together a new proposal for the syndicated Transformers cartoon. After reviewing both the miniseries and Scott's documents, they submitted their ideas for the series at the end of the month, proposing that it continue directly from the end of the miniseries, with a focus on the premise those 3 episodes had already established: the Decepticons seeking to plunder the energy of Earth, and the Autobots fighting to stop them. The series went into production the next month with Malik and Robbins as story editors, and the rest is history. Malik and Robbins loosely adapted a few ideas from the network pitches into the finished series, giving the Decepticons an underwater base, and repositioning Bumblebee to be the friend and companion of human ally Spike Witwicky, just as his counterpart Toad, or Muffler, had been to Wendy. Also, at one point, Malik and Robbins were considering copying the Second Bible's format of having 2 regular male human characters, a young boy and an older guy, and proposed differentiating the 2 by making the younger boy disabled. While this didn't happen, there can be little doubt that this train of thought inspired the inclusion in the series of wheelchair-using supporting character Chip Chase. Transformers fans wouldn't find out about the existence of Scott's work until the 2000s, when the man himself mentioned the Bible and pilot script on his website resume. A little more information was gleaned late in the decade, when a piece of internal Marvel Productions correspondence from Robbins and Malik was discovered, which mentioned a few details about the network presentation, including Matt and Eddie's names, which in turn led to a reference to Matt and Eddie being slipped into the 2009 Transformers animated guidebook, the Allspark Almanac. A decade later, however, it would turn out that some of this stuff had been hiding in plain sight all along. You see, less than a year after Scott handed his work in, the January 1985 issue of Comics Feature magazine ran an article on Marvel Productions. Among the images included with the piece was some of the art produced to accompany Scott's Transformers Bibles, the original illustration featuring Optimus Prime, and 2 of the later Muffler pieces. Except the Muffler art was identified as belonging to a cartoon called Car and Cable. Since there was nothing to visually link these images to Transformers, and the article was full of art for other unproduced Marvel cartoons, for a long time it was assumed that Car and Cable had just been an attempt by Marvel to develop a show of their own to tie into the 80s transforming robot craze that had simply gone unmade. It wasn't until March 2020 when the original artwork and 2 more pieces were found by Instagram user Consumer Collectibles that we discovered they were connected to Scott's Transformers pitch, leaving us to presume that Car and Cable must just have been a fake title used to print the images without giving their Transformers ancestry away. Finally, in late 2024 and early 2025, Jeffrey Scott himself auctioned off his planning notes, Bibles, and pilot script on eBay, putting them safely in the hands of fans, filling in most of the remaining blanks, and leading to this video. Check the notes for links to the Sunbow Marvel Archive, where all these documents are publicly hosted and available for you to read yourself. Now, however you might think the CBS pitch sounds in comparison to the show we got, there are a lot of ideas in it that capture the imagination. And it's got to be said that, in the big picture, both versions of the Bible feature much more ambitious, sharply defined scenarios and story engines than the loose, simple, good versus evil over energy story structure of the show that made it to TV, which notably foreground the franchise core concept of transformation and disguise, in a way the finished cartoon simply didn't. Furthermore, it's fascinating to see how, even though the content of the pitch has been a mystery for 40 years, other writers have independently arrived at many of the same ideas about how to handle the franchise in subsequent series. For instance, the idea that Transformers' consciousnesses could survive the destruction of their bodies as spheres of energy, which could be transferred into new bodies, is highly reminiscent of the concept of sparks, introduced in 1996's Beast Wars, and featured in essentially every series since. Earth machines being reconfigured into Transformers through the implantation of a life force would be seen in 2007's first live-action Transformers movie, influencing subsequent shows like Transformers Animated and BotBots. The concept of Transformers operating in secret on Earth for many years, their half-glimpsed actions inspiring urban legends and conspiracy theories, would be explored in series like 1988's Super God Master Force and 2005's Transformers Cybertron. Matt Conroy finding and repairing a damaged truck that turns out to be Optimus Prime would be echoed by Cade Yeager in 2014's Age of Extinction, while the concept of Muffler adopting a Volkswagen form to hide from the Decepticons, only to be then bought by an unsuspecting Wendy, mirrors perfectly the story of Bumblebee and Charlie Watson, seen in 2018's Bumblebee movie. Heck, if we sidestep out of the Transformers franchise, the premise of evil alien energy beings coming to Earth, possessing the planet's machines and turning them into transforming robot bodies, leading to heroic energy beings following them to the planet and doing the same, befriending the human owners of the vehicles they inhabit, is the exact plot of the Super Robot anime that was the direct follow-up to Transformers in Japan, 1990's Brave X-Kaiser. Though this early vision for the world of the Transformers may have been very different from the cartoon that ultimately wound up being produced, the fact that some of the biggest pieces of Transformers media since have unknowingly wound up taking the same approach it did decades earlier only goes to show that Jeffrey Scott and the others involved clearly saw the appeal that lay at the heart of the concept. The excitement, the wonder, even the fear that lay in the possibility that any machine around you could secretly be a robot in disguise.